Boxy, Boxy, we're live. Hi, I'm Larry Harnish, and this is Boxy, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's files in the Black Dahlia case. Aren't you, Boxy? We're going to be talking about you today. Now, if you missed last time, you had a very rare occasion to meet Boxy's sister, Boxetta. Boxetta is the Los Angeles County District Attorney's files in the Gene French case, the Otto Stephen Wilson case. There's some Louise Springer material in there, and also, I think, Gladys Kern. So Boxetta is sort of a utility player, but today, Boxy is back from vacation, rested, and ready to go. Anyway, I'm Larry Harnish. I do the Ask Me Anything on the first Tuesday of the month about the Black Dahlia case. And I do another one the third Tuesday of the month, generally, on George Hodel and Steve Hodel. I was getting so many questions about George Hodel and Steve Hodel that I split them off into another session because I don't want to really waste a lot of time on them. Okay, so who is this Larry Harnish guy, and why is he doing the Ask Me Anything at all? Okay, Larry Harnish, that's me. 34 years in journalism, 27 at the Los Angeles Times. Okay. I worked on a number of Pulitzer-winning projects. While I was at the Times, I was mainly a copy editor. I was a feature writer, wrote some columns, did a lot of blogging about LA history. And so that's who I am. I got involved with the Black Dahlia case way back in 1996. I suggested a story for the 50th anniversary of the Black Dahlia case, which was coming up in a few months in January of 1997. And so I pitched the story, not for me to do, but it would be good if the paper did it. And so the assistant city editor at the time said, "Hey, great idea. Do you want to write it?" And so I did. And from that time forward, I kind of considered it my obligation to try to set the record straight on the Black Dahlia case. And I did that for a long time. I talked to anybody with a microphone and a camera. You want to talk about the Black Dahlia case? Come on down. But in the last, I'd say 4 or 5 years, it became increasingly clear that people didn't want the record set straight about the Black Dahlia case. They wanted a regurgitation of the same old stuff. And as I have said before, but it bears repeating, the people at home watching the true crime TV shows, you have no idea how much they are cutting corners. It was always, there were some good shows and there were some not good shows, but now it's all just do it on the cheap, poorly researched, slam them out there. And I just didn't want to be any part of that anymore. So I don't do interviews generally, with a few exceptions. I don't do TV shows. I did make an exception for a podcast called The Consult. And if you are new, if you heard them mention me on The Consult, thank you. What is The Consult? The Consult is very different for a true crime podcast. It's former FBI agents discussing cases. And it is light years away from the usual true crime podcast, which is having somebody read Wikipedia to you while the sidekick goes, "Oh my God, oh my God." That's most true crime podcasts are like that. The Consult is very well done in the sense that it is very methodical and deliberative and analytical. They don't jump to conclusions at all, which is such a relief. It's kind of slow paced, but again, this is how they operate for real. It reminded me of my conversations with John Douglas about the Black Dahlia case back in 1996, because it's the same sort of approach. Well, you tend to see this, although not always. It's a lot more analytical and methodical and guarded. And I wouldn't have talked. I listened to a bunch of episodes and I decided, yeah, I'll talk to them. So they did a 3-parter on the Black Dahlia case. They looked at victimology, then they looked at the killer, and then they looked at some, I think, some conclusions, and they had me back. I think there will be a part 4 with me at some point, and this was very atypical because I do not do true crime podcasts. I stay away from that stuff. The only other exception was I did an interview with the LA Times a few years ago with Chris Goffard. That was my former employer. I felt kind of obligated to do that one. I'm glad I did. But I was very guarded with that one as well. So I'm not a fan of the true crime industrial complex. That's why I do this instead. But with a few exceptions, yeah, I did do the Christopher Goffard interview, and then I did the consult. And it is interesting, but it is different. It is a little more leisurely. It's a little more methodical. It's more analytic. I wouldn't say it's, entertainment if you're driving. I'm not a podcast person. I'm really not. But they're the real deal. If you want to hear how real profilers discuss cases, check out the consult. That's how it's done. And so I did talk to them. So if you can, and they did mention me. So if you came here because of the consult, thank you and welcome. Anyway, that's kind of the introduction of who I am. Now let's see. The way this works is I'll talk for a while, and I got a bunch of stuff to cover, and I also have a bunch of questions. So I'm not sure I'm going to get to everything. I'll do my best. I don't know. I do get trolls. There are no trolls like true crime trolls, that's for sure. So that's why chat is on super duper slow. If I get a troll, they'll get blocked. Anyway, so just a few orders of business. The George Hodel, Steve Hodel session is the third Tuesday. That is, what is that? November 18th. And then the next Dahlia session will be December 2nd. All at 10 a.m. Pacific time right here on YouTube. Okay. The book. I just got back from Pacific Grove, where I go. Non-sponsored endorsement. I am a big fan of Bookworks PG. Bookworks PG is a combination coffee house and bookstore in Pacific Grove, California. It's a great place. I support them, and there's my stainless steel mug. So yeah, give a shout out to them. But anyway, I did read through the book, which is now at about 176,000 words. Wow. Part 1 is the life of Elizabeth Short. The book is organized. The life of Elizabeth Short, that's part 1. Part 2 is the death of Elizabeth Short. That's the investigation. Part 3 is the myth of Elizabeth Short, and then maybe some answers. So that's how it's organized. Part 1 is essentially done. At this point, I'm worried mainly about formatting. What is the Chicago Manual of Style on quotes or movie titles, stuff like that. It's a lot more formatting than anything else, that kind of thing. Part 2, which is what I'm working on now, is the investigation. And I have worked through the crime scene. I've worked through that. I've worked through the autopsy. That took a long time. And so now I am dealing with a combination of the police, the LAPD are doing their thing, and the newspapers are doing their thing. And so there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of names, a lot of things to keep straight. And it's an organizational challenge for sure. So that's where I am now. But I'm pleased to say that part 1 reads pretty well. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. And it's, people say, oh, well, Larry Harnish has writer's block. Larry Harnish has given up. No, it's an extremely complicated story. And you can just tell it as a narrative, but you have to put the art into it without seeming like having the art of it. And so it's a delicate process of what are you going to say, what are you going to put in, and what are you going to leave out? Anyway, so I mean, just kind of as a challenge for a writer rather than, talking about the researching. It's just the writing of it. Yeah. So that was that. And I talked about the consult. Now, the other thing I want to talk about before I get into the questions is, and I did this before, I talked about the Eli Frankel's book, Sisters in Death. I got an advanced copy through NetGalley, and I read it. I posted a review of it on my blog. I discussed it in one of the previous Ask Me Anythings. But it is getting some traction, so I thought it would be worthwhile to discuss it again, however briefly. Okay, Boxy, it's your turn here. Okay, now what do I have here? And the Eli Frankel, the Sisters in Death book, also what I'm going to say about that also has to deal, also pertains to the William J. Mann's Black Dahlia book, which is coming out next year, January. And it all has to do with this little memo right here. You see this guy here, right here? If you were here last time, you know what's going to happen to this memo, don't you? Okay. It was written in February 1951 by Frank Jemison. Okay. So already there's questions about it. Was it written by Harry Hansen, lead detective? No. Was it written by his partner, Phineas Brown, or Phineas Brown, or Phineas Brown? Every time I say Phineas Brown's name, somebody corrects me. Okay. It wasn't written by either of them. It was written by Frank Jemison in 1951. Frank Jemison was the detective for the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. He was one of them. He was not the only one, but most of what's in Boxy is the work of Frank Jemison. And you will see this memo floating around. This is actually when he realized that his services were no longer needed on investigating the Black Dahlia case. And so he wrote rather peevishly, he listed all these suspects and said, case closed. Okay. The reason this list is important is because it's actually multiple pages. Okay. But what happens is the memo gets stripped down to the first page. And if you go on Wikipedia, okay, if you go on Wikipedia, list of Black Dahlia subjects, it started out as this. And why is that important? Why are we discussing that? People treat the Black Dahlia case like a game of Clue. They assume that, well, killer's got to be, here's the list of suspects. It's got to be one of them. Is it Colonel Mustard? Is it Professor Plum? Is it Miss Scarlet? No. How do you get on this list? The way to get on this list is to be known to the police. So these were all, except for a couple that were never identified, people who were already known to the police. If they were known to the police, they were investigated, right? So that means nobody on this list did it. And they are, Carl Balsiger is number one, the Eli Frankel suspect. We have C. Welsh, we have Sergeant Chuck, John Wade, Joe Scalise, James Nimmo, Maurice Clement, a Chicago police officer, Salvador Torres Vara, Dr. George Hodel, Marvin Margolis, Glenn Wolfe, Michael Anthony Otero. Okay, here's what we do with this list. Tear it up. These people were all known to the police. They were all investigated. Throw it away. But I'm not done yet. This is going to be long. Okay, I am going to read Jemison because this is the part of the memo that gets lost. Nobody ever sees this. It's just the first page. Okay. It's an entire page, single spaced. I'm going to read it. You're going to be bored stiff. Sorry. But here's what it is. And I'm reading this because Mr. Eli Frankel presumably had it. Okay. Carl Balsiger, in February 1933, was stationed at Camp Cook at the same time as Beth Short. That's kind of true. They overlapped for a while. She was employed there in the commissary. She was not employed. She was employed in PX1. When questioned by police on January 20th, 1947, Balsiger, stated he first met the victim at a real estate office on Sunset Boulevard on December 6, 1946. Yeah, that's probably true. That she moved out of the Chancellor Hotel that date, and that he took her in his car on a business trip to Camarillo. Yeah. Now, she didn't move out of the Chancellor. She got booted out for not paying her rent, is what really happened. Rent at the Chancellor was $1 a day for a bunk bed. And why was Elizabeth Short at the Chancellor at all? She'd had a fight with one of Mark Hansen's girlfriends and moved out. He wanted her out. She moved out. It was not going well. Anyway, that's why she's at the Chancellor at all. It's up on Cherokee. And she was in there with 4 women paying $1 a day for a bunk bed. And so that's where she was. But she got booted out of there for not paying her rent. Okay. That's why she was really there. Okay. He took her on a business trip to Camarillo. Yes, that's true. Where he made a sale of supplies to a baker. Yes, that's probably true. They returned to Los Angeles the same day. No, that's not true. No. Elizabeth Short and a business partner were there and all came back together the next day. So it was an overnight business trip out to Camarillo and back. They returned to Los Angeles the same day. Nope. Then he signed his name for a room for the victim at a hotel on Yucca Street, Hollywood. That on December 7th, he took her down to the bus station in Hollywood. That's true. Where she said she was going to take a bus to San Francisco to see her sister. She told everybody that. Yeah. Yeah. She didn't go to San Francisco, but she told everybody she was going to do that. Let's see. He said that he had no sexual relationship with her. He felt sorry for her. That's probably true also. This story was not believed, as the facts indicated that the victim took the bus to San Diego on December 9th, 1946. Well, that's not Balsiger's problem. She told everybody she was going to San Francisco, you know. Okay. It was established this suspect had on 2 occasions given different women vicious beatings, apparently for no good reason. And that, let's see, a 22-year-old woman by the name of Dorothy Welsh, it's actually Lila Welsh, with whom he attended school in Kansas City. No, he didn't attend school with her. That's wrong, too. Was murdered in that city in 1941 in a similar manner as victim Short. No, they're totally different. Lila Welsh was killed in March 1941. She was beaten to death in bed. Okay. Elizabeth Short was killed somewhere, nobody knows for sure, and left on Norton Avenue. Okay, so the manner of killing was already totally different. And for example, Elizabeth Short was cut in half. Lila Welsh was not cut in half. They're not the same. Sorry, Frank Jimison. They're not the same. They're totally different. The brother Claude Welsh had been tried for this murder and was acquitted. That is true. It was further suspected that this suspect, Balsiger, had known Short at Camp Cook and had been court-martialed and sent overseas as a result of testimony of Short, who also laid claim to the personal effects and property of this suspect. Okay, what is all of this about? Okay. Camp Cook, at that point, when Elizabeth Short and Carl Balsiger were there, it had a population of 36,000 people. Okay, it's bigger than Beverly Hills. It's ridiculous to say that everybody knew everybody else. And more important, Balsiger was a lieutenant. He was not a sergeant. Okay, big difference. There was this story floating around that Elizabeth Short shacked up with Sergeant Chuck, the never identified, never found Sergeant Chuck, and that he was violent, and she testified against him and got him court-martialed and sent overseas. And so that was his motive for killing her, except they could never find Sergeant Chuck. And we'll get into more of that. So Jimison here tries to turn Sergeant Chuck into Lieutenant Balsiger. No, he's got it all wrong. Okay. Let's see. Investigation by undersigned and Sergeant Brown. That's Finest Brown. Established apartment where he was rooming at the time of the murder in Hollywood, and that he lied when he said he had been with the victim only one day and night. He probably had a bad memory. It was more than one day and night. and that his name did not appear in the victim's address book, but that appeared on a folded piece of paper in her personal effects, which were mailed to the police department on January 24th, 1947. Okay. What is he talking about here? The killer took some of Elizabeth Short's items from her purse and mailed them not to the police, but to the newspapers. You see how unreliable Jemison is? Are you beginning to get a picture of now? Sitting here in 2025, we have a lot of online archives and material that Jemison didn't have. He didn't have an online archive of all kinds of newspapers. He couldn't access Balsiger's Army records like we can, like I can. Okay. But nonetheless, we do know that Balsiger's address was written on a piece of paper that was mailed to the newspapers. But we also know that Balsiger was in her address book. That's wrong. Jemison is really kind of iffy. There was no hotel register on Yucca Street that contained the name of the suspect on the evening of December 6th. He was finally located in St. Louis. Sergeant Brown went there, where he was given a lie detector test and questioned. He admitted being with the victim until December 9th, I think. It's a little hard to read. But convinced Sergeant Brown that he was not the sergeant court-martialed at Camp Cook. Well, no, he wasn't. And that he had not seen the victim after December 9th, 1946. That's probably also true. He was informed that Claude Welch was in Hollywood at the time of the murder. It has not been established that he ever met victim. I think he means Walsh. It has since been ascertained that the sergeant who knew the victim at Camp Cook, against whom she testified in court-martial, and again, no, none of this is true, okay? None of it's true. Elizabeth Short didn't shack up with some guy off base. She lived in a civilian dormitory at Camp Cook. That's where she lived. So none of this story is all bullshit. Again, you have to be, just because something is old doesn't mean it's accurate, okay? Jemison is really problematic. Okay, the information was secured from interviewing numerous friends of victim at Camp Cook, who worked in the commissary. She didn't work, she worked in the PX, and information from officers stationed there in 1943. Thus far, it has been impossible to find any record of such a court-martial proceedings. Oh, really? Really? We can't find the court-martial of Sergeant Chuck? See photographs, other reports on this suspect. Okay. Now, I will also point out the murder of Lila Welch occurred in March 1941, and Balsiger didn't go to school with her. No, that's wrong. Balsiger, and I have his Army records. Balsiger went into the Army in 1940. Okay. He was stationed at McCord Field, Washington, all through, I think it was until June 1941. But in any event, he was not around to kill Lila Welch, who was murdered, who was beaten to death. She was not killed just like Elizabeth Short. No, he didn't. He was in the Army. I have his personnel records. So, the point is, people need to stop treating the Black Dahlia case like a game of Clue. This Eli Frankel book, he says he has Balsiger's Army records, which I have them. They show he was stationed in Washington at the time of the first murder, and everything if he has Boxy or even a segment of Boxy, he will know that Balsiger was eliminated. Balsiger was known to the police and eliminated. So, yeah. Anyway, that's my rant about treating the Black Dahlia case like a game of Clue. Sorry for, making you read all this, but there's really no other way to say, yeah, just because a document is old doesn't mean it's accurate. You got to be very careful of that. Okay, that is my rant. If I forgot something, I'll say it later. But again, I did a review of the Frankel book already. And the William Mann book is the same thing. He's got a guy. It's on the list. He was investigated and eliminated. But, let's turn it into a game of Clue. So, okay, let's go back to live question here. Boxy. Is it true Buddy Lagore saw Elizabeth Short at the Four Straw? Well, he thought he did. Or he thought he saw somebody like that. He probably didn't see her, but you have to remember there were all sorts of phantom sightings of Elizabeth Short during where she was, from the time she left the Biltmore, January 9th, until the time her body was found on January 15th. Nobody knows where she was. And let me point out, everybody likes to talk about this policewoman who helped this lady who thought, was, at the bus station and waiting for her daddy and all that stuff. And the policewoman identified this woman as Elizabeth Short. Okay. And it was in all the papers and everything else, but it was based on a verbal description of Elizabeth Short. And once policewoman McBride saw the mugshot of Elizabeth Short, it's like, no, I don't think that was her. She walked it back. So no. Okay. Let's see. What can you deduce from the force with which she was hit in the head? Was her killer physically strong, you think? That's hard to say. She was hit across the head pretty hard enough to cause bleeding in the brain. She was hit that hard. Now, I don't know how hard you have to hit somebody to do that. But presumably hard enough. And I don't think they ever determined what kind of instrument was used to hit her in the head, but hard enough to cause bleeding. Whether, how hard it was, I don't know. If you know where to hit somebody, maybe you don't need to hit them that hard, if you do it in the right spot. Okay. Can it be legally proven that Walter Alonzo Bailey murdered Elizabeth Short? I mean, could evidence be presented by a Black Dahlia researcher that would satisfy the LAPD and the DA? That's hard to say. At this point, the LAPD isn't going to. At this point, the LAPD isn't going to lift a finger on the Black Dahlia case. Why not? Because the LAPD is only interested in murder cases that will result in an arrest and a conviction. Nobody's ever going to be arrested in the Black Dahlia case. No one is ever going to be convicted in the Black Dahlia case. And so at this point, I mean, what we know is this. We know that Walter Bailey lived a block from the crime scene. We know that Walter Bailey's daughter knew Elizabeth Short's sister. We do know that. We do know that of all the people who have been put forward, Walter Bailey is the only one who really had the skill to do what was done to Elizabeth Short. He could have done that. And we do know, based on post-crime behavior, that he, and these are in the news accounts, he had some secret that his partner learned, and he had split up with his wife. And every time he wanted to go back to his wife, the partner threatened to expose this secret, whatever it was, that would ruin him. And he lived in constant fear of that. So, I mean, would it meet the threshold for a trial and a conviction? Probably not as it is now. But I mean, that's all a hypothetical. That's never really gonna happen. Okay, I've got a longish question here, but let me do another shorty from the chat. Is it true that Red Manley was committed to an asylum in later years? Red Manley was in and out of Patton. There was the story, not true, that he committed suicide in a mental institution, and that's not true. None of that's true. Okay, let's see here. Okay, I'm going to skip all of that. One of the things that came up in the consult was that the killer was a World War II veteran with an anatomical or medical experience, such as a medic, field surgeon, or pathology technician. wartime exposure to dissection, battlefield casualties, and the routine handling of the dead could account for both the anatomical precision and the emotional detachment evident in the crime. So, in other words, the question is, do you think it's possible that some? Do you think that? Do you think it's possible that the murder was committed by a veteran who had maybe committed some crimes overseas? Okay, let's take a look at that. One of the scenarios that the original detectives had was that Elizabeth Short was killed by a traumatized veteran reliving the horrors of World War II. And they looked at that. The newspapers of the time had some really wild stories about veterans who had mental problems, who had psychological problems, and they weren't all necessarily they hadn't necessarily been in combat. Look at Red Manley. What did Red Manley do? Red Manley was a saxophone player at a remote airfield in, I think it was Northern California. And he had a psychological meltdown. He had a mental breakdown, and he was in a locked facility and then released to the VA here in Los Angeles. And, the guy had never seen, except for basic training, I don't think he'd ever been around gunfire. He was a sax player. He was a musician. But, so it isn't necessarily people who had been in combat and seen horrors. I should mention that Red Manley was thoroughly investigated and eliminated. So no, he didn't do it either. But that was one of the things they looked at. There was one guy, and you have to look at the level of expertise that these guys who went into the service were getting in terms of battlefield medicine. And I'm speaking very, very, very generally here. The idea would be to stabilize the individual and get them to a facility where they could get more advanced training, which makes sense. Yeah. So in terms of being in a battlefield hospital or something like that, because the kind of people who were in the battlefield hospitals were doctors. The doctors went into the service to perform, their profession, except for George Hodel, who couldn't get into the service because he had a bad heart. He couldn't get it. No service would take him. But yeah, they took a lot of doctors for that reason. So that's kind of the answer, the answer, non-answer. But I mean, the main thing is they looked at the idea that a veteran with PTSD killed Elizabeth Short. They did look at that. The main thing that I keep coming back to is when John Douglas did his original profiling. He said, this is not a youthful offender. Okay, this is an older guy. And you have to remember the guys who were in the military were really young. 18, 19, 20. That's who these guys were. Maybe their early 20s. So none of them were really old enough to do what was done to Elizabeth Short. Whoever killed Elizabeth Short knew how to cut up a human body. No question about it. And I point out again and again, cow anatomy, pig anatomy, sheep anatomy. They're not built like human beings. It's different. And you watch the videos of guys who are butchers. They know their cow anatomy really well, but cows aren't built like people. Okay. Let's see. Don't you find the postcard mailed to Elizabeth from Washington, D.C. rather suspicious? I don't know. What postcard is that? I'm not aware of any postcard mailed to Washington, to Elizabeth Short. There was a telegram. Do you mean the telegram? Because there was a telegram, but I'm not aware of any postcard. Let's see. I listened to the consult on the Black Dahlia. One of the panels suggested Elizabeth Short was likely bisected due to practical removal purposes. Yeah, absolutely. Ease of transportation. Totally. Yeah, that's what happened. The other stuff had meaning to the killer, but bisecting Elizabeth Short was simply for transportation. But you have to ask yourself, and this is what you should always. And I made a whole study of this, which was very interesting, on dismemberment. Okay, because cutting somebody in half like that is probably the least efficient, messiest way to dismember a body. How do you dismember a body generally? And again, most murder victims are not dismembered. Okay. I think it's I read a comment from a criminologist. 5% or less of homicide victims are dismembered, and it's usually for concealment, disposal, and concealing the link to the victim. Okay. So how do you dismember? How is it done generally? Well, it's here. Okay. And, the legs right around the groin, cut off the legs. And then depending on what kind of disposal container you're using, they might subdivide, the arm if they're getting it. But, or the head. If the killer doesn't want the head identified, you cut it, cut off the head, cut off the hands. And if the killer had cut off Elizabeth Short's hand and her head, she would have never been identified. Obviously, he had the skill to do that. He did not do that. Okay. So yeah, it was, but again, it is the least efficient because you've got to go, and people think, oh, well, you only go through the spine. Yeah, well, I spent a lot of time studying human anatomy. You have to go through all the muscles and ligaments in the back. You've got to go through all of that and the spine, and you're cutting the digestive tract. Okay. And that's messy. I mean, along with the blood from cutting somebody in half and bleeding them out like that, you've got the intestines. Okay. And unless you tie that stuff off, you're going to get fecal material all over the place. It's very messy. So it's not a good way to do it. And it's extremely unusual. There are a few cases, but generally it is the traditional way is, the arms and the legs, whatnot. So, okay. Let's see. It was the telegram. Yeah. That is the promise. A promise is a promise to a person of the world, yours. It's unsigned. Now, Steve Hodel alert. Steve Hodel made a big deal about it being from his dad, except he had the year wrong because Steve is very bad with details. He had the year wrong. Unfortunately, we cannot see in the photographs of the telegram. We can only make out the year that it was sent and not the month and the day. So we don't know who it's from. It could be anybody. She met a lot of guys. I don't know. But it's like, well, that's sort of interesting. But beyond that, no idea. Let's see. Okay. This is a good one. When you say the Astor Motel was not the crime scene, can you explain why it wasn't? I'm curious why a hotel room filled with blood was not a crime scene of some kind. Someone's been reading the internet. Have you been using the internet irresponsibly? Very yes. Okay. Now it's in Boxing, okay, of the Astor Motel. And they interviewed the people who had been the managers of and what am I talking about? There was a long investigation. The Astor Motel was down on South Flower, and there was this sort of nebulous allegations that Elizabeth Short had been there, maybe Mark Hansen. There was this man from Batavia who maybe was Mark Hansen, maybe not. It was all very nebulous. Anyway, there was supposedly blood in this hotel room. Now, it wasn't a Stephen King thing of the hotel room was drenched with blood. As a matter of fact, I went through the memos today. and they weren't sure what cabin it was. Maybe it was cabin number 3, or it could have been cabin number 6. Anyway, the crime lab, Ray Pinker of the crime lab, went down to the Astor Motel and did a chemical search for blood traces. I think he found some, but I mean, the manager they actually like drew a map of one of the rooms. Okay, where the blood was here and the blood was here and the blood was here, and they looked for blood and they really didn't find much. So again, the Astor, it was not a hotel room drenched in blood. No, wasn't like that at all. So I mean, that's why, as they looked at it, they eliminated it, and that's why. Okay, so that will go. Okay. Do you think it was a big mistake? Let's see. Why did Elizabeth want to hide her true circumstances from her family, especially her sister in California, since she presumably might have been able to help in some way? I think Elizabeth Short didn't want the family to know what she was up to. She was positioning herself. She had spun off a lot of stories. She was telling people that she had been married, she had a kid that died, or she was a widow. So, I mean, the family, I mean, the sisters might not have approved. Now, just to get into the family dynamics a little bit, the mom, Phoebe helped Elizabeth Short for sure. She sent money when she could. Absolutely, that's true. The oldest sister, Virginia, there was a bit of friction there for the simple reason that you had 5 girls born, I think it's within 7 years. And so there was some friction in terms of the oldest sister, Virginia. Phoebe was gone. So it's like Virginia got put in charge of taking care of the sisters, and she resented them. They resented her because she was bossy. I mean, that's kind of the dynamic that I picked up on in talking to the Short family. So it was not a big, smiling, happy. No, there was some conflict there. And I'm pretty sure that Elizabeth Short's oldest sister, Virginia, would not have approved of Elizabeth Short knocking around LA and telling people all these stories. I'm pretty sure that would not have played well. So that's why. Okay. Let's see here. What was the purpose of Elizabeth Short's killer by sending her belongings in the envelope to the LA Examiner? The obvious answer is mockery, control, or any litany of twisted psychological reasons, perhaps. If the theory that the killer was sending a message, a personal one, wouldn't the murder and display of her corpse be enough? Oh, no. And, Finest Brown, God, said it perfectly when he was when Finest Brown, or Phineas Brown, however you want to say it, was testifying before the grand jury discussing the Black Dahlia case, and it's in Boxy. The way her body was displayed, why was it done that way? What did he say? A mania for publicity. And the same thing came out when I talked to John Douglas. Okay. And this was one of the theories, that it was just a good Samaritan found her stuff and didn't want to get involved, so he mailed. But you wouldn't have this stuff because it was known to be in her purse. These were known to have come from her purse. Address book, business cards, calling cards, snapshots, random pieces of paper, her birth certificate, stuff like that. Okay. There was only one place for that, and that was from her purse. And so whoever sent that in had access to her purse, which means they had access to Elizabeth Short. Now, if it was a good Samaritan just sending it in, you send it to the cops, right? The killer didn't do that. The killer sent it to the newspapers in, ransom note fashion, right? Cut out newspapers. The killer wanted the publicity. That was the whole point, is he wanted the publicity, a mania for publicity, just like Finest Brown said. That's why. Okay. Do you think it was a big mistake the detectives on the case didn't focus their attention mainly on surgeons rather than on doctors who were accused of sex crimes? Um, I don't really want to second guess them. I think they did. I think they did pretty well. I think they were heading in that. I think they were heading in the right direction. Maybe they didn't pursue it as far as they might have. They did background checks on all the medical students at SC. They did that. Um, but I mean, in terms of they could have, but they didn't do that. And the, as I said, I don't want to second guess these guys. They had all sorts of scenarios, all sorts of possibilities. I think it was a state of the art investigation for 1947. I will absolutely not say that the police bungled it. They blew it. They didn't. It was a state of the art investigation for 1947. Harry Hansen had been on homicide for 20 something years. I think he had been on and off. He'd been a cop for a long time, and then was assigned to homicide and stayed in it for the rest of his career. No, they were good, sharp detectives, and there was a lot of institutional memory there. And one thing I talked about in the consult is, well, they didn't have these online databases where you could check, a homicide or something like that. And I said, yeah, that's true. They didn't have an online database, but they had an informal network. The homicide cops of this era had drinking buddies all over the country. They needed something done somewhere. Hey, they would call up their buddy. That's how it worked. I mean, it was an informal network, but yeah, they all did that. And I know that because I became friends with one of the homicide cops, and he said, yeah, there wasn't anybody. And if something happened any place in the country, we could call up, a buddy, a pal, and say, what's going on? And by the same token, the Black Dahlia case received nationwide publicity. And it stands to reason that if any other jurisdiction in the country had something similar, they would have contacted the LAPD. In fact, the LAPD looked at the Cleveland torso killings. And I know that because I had access to Jack Donahoe, who's captain of homicide at the time. I had access to his stuff. And there was a big envelope of clippings on the Cleveland torso case. I know they looked at it. They looked at everything. They really did. Okay. So I don't want to second guess the cops. Let's see here. Which movie series or documentary about the Black Dahlia is your favorite? I would have to say Bill Curtis' Cold Case Files is probably the best. It was certainly better than what came after it. I would say Bill Curtis, Cold Case Files, they really did their homework. They did it first rate. They came out with a couple of camera operators, and I think they had 2 sound guys. Now it's all local. Now it's all local talent. If you're doing a crime show out in LA now, it's like the camera operators and the sound guys are just standing on the corner looking for work. But Bill Curtis brought out his own audio visual team, and they really went the extra mile, I would say. So probably that one, if any of them. And as I said, I don't do them anymore. There was one I did for the Travel Channel that kind of, it was kind of the last straw for me, in that they had, and it's expensive. It can be expensive to film in the Biltmore. And so they had arranged, because it's the Travel Channel, to shoot in the bar. And so the setup was I would go in with the host of the show and go into the bar. And I kept saying, this bar wasn't here in 1947. No, don't say that. But it wasn't. You're going to give people the wrong impression that this is the bar from the 40s. And it's not. It is a modern, it's like, and the duplicity there was just, I didn't want to deal with it anymore. It's just bogus. So yeah, I would say that the Cold Case Files was good. Why did James Ellroy make that stupid fictional movie on Black Dahlia? Money. I mean, that's every writer's dream, is to, get a movie deal on a book. Sure. You know, Same thing with LA Confidential. Now, James, for whatever reason, I don't know, he will badmouth LA Confidential, which is one of the, it has become like, along with Chinatown, one of the defining movies of LA, of that period, regardless of the historical problems. Um, yeah, James will say, "Oh yeah, LA Confidential." It's like, oh, that's a pretty good movie. It has plot holes, but the Black Dahlia movie is just absolutely awful. Okay, let's see. It seems over the years that bits of information and evidence have occasionally been released to the public from the police files on the case. I believe your position is that the entire file should never be released, but could you walk us through the history of when and why certain information would have been released through the decades? Okay. What is released to the public, was released to the public, from the LAPD files, is generally what was released in the 1940s at the time of the investigation. Okay, that's mainly because the cops were talking to, the reporters. And in those days, there was no press information office, there was no public information officer, or anything like that. That didn't come along for years. If you were a reporter and you wanted to, you just go up to the officer or the sergeant, or the detective, and, detective so and so, what do you think? And they would say. That doesn't happen now, but at the time, yeah, the reporters would, go up, and so that's how a lot of information got out. And in terms of the, uh, in terms of the files, a few things were released before Elizabeth Short was identified, in terms of, her physical description: height, weight, eye color, um, the descriptions of moles on her back, and that kind of stuff. That was all released. Um, After that, the LAPD really clamped down on, the release of information. And the every so often, the LAPD will do a dog and pony show. They had one in, Las Vegas at one time on the Black Dahlia case, and they displayed a few things. Um, and there was, the police museum here in Los Angeles, had a James Elroy presents Elizabeth, and they had some stuff on display there. Now, most of it wasn't helpful. Okay, most of it was, and that was from the file cabinet. There is an entire file cabinet devoted to the Black Dahlia case, and it was stuff. It was stuff. Most of it was already released already, or it was unimportant. It would be somebody who had confessed to the case, who was eliminated, like the Woody Guthrie stuff, or a list of, here's a list of all the houses where we door knocked after the killing. It's like, yeah, okay, those are police files. They're not really helpful. They don't really tell you anything, except the extent of it. There was one useful thing, and the pictures are all over the place. Um, Elizabeth Short met these two guys from Idaho, who were like one last trip to LA before they settled back down to civilian life. And, they were staying at this, hotel apartment house in Long Beach, where Elizabeth Short was staying in the summer of 1946. And they got to know her, and she wanted to go dancing at the Palladium. So they took her, and nobody had a car. They took the streetcar and whatnot up to Hollywood, went to the Palladium. And so when you see those photographs that are floating around of her in front of Grauman's Chinese Theater and Earl Carroll's and that stuff, that's all from the same trip with these guys. And those photographs were in the, LAPD display. But I mean, that's it. Most of it, they just don't show it. Um, was the Black Dahlia case ever raised an election issue? No, no. It did come up in the sense that, is there a crime wave and that sort of thing. But that's about it. No, it was never an election issue. Okay. Um, Just seems like a lot of work when a body will fit in a large. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Um, let's see. Did Elizabeth call anyone from the payphones at the Biltmore? We don't know. They certainly checked on that. They looked at that. They thought maybe she called Mark Hansen, but they could never nail it down. The most that they could come up with is, well, it looked like she was walking toward the payphones, but let's see. What was Elizabeth Short's ethnic heritage? Oh, good question. Elizabeth Short was English, primarily English. Now, James Ellroy, when he talked about the Black Dahlia case, which he doesn't do anymore, he will say, oh, she was Shanty Irish. No. Elizabeth Short's ancestors came over on the Mayflower, okay? For real. Came over on the Mayflower, fought in the Revolutionary War. Yeah. And Phoebe was a member of the DAR. So that is English, is the heritage. Let's see. Okay. Let's go over here. Well, okay, hang on here. I got to do my bookkeeping so I don't answer the same question twice. Nothing remains of her purse contents. We don't know. Could be in the file cabinet. Some of it was analyzed. We don't know where the contents of we don't know where that was. There's photographs of it, but that's all. Do you think Dr. Bailey would have been really strong at his age to bisect Elizabeth Short? Yeah. I'm 74. Yeah. People want to, make it, when you get to be 60, it's just hang it up. Your life is over. I'm 74, it's like, yeah, definitely. Let's see. Is it possible that Elizabeth Short changed shoes and purse after she left the French's home? Well, not really. Because she was with Red Manley the whole time. He didn't say, it would be, okay. Elizabeth Short, when Red Manley brought Elizabeth Short up to Los Angeles, he took her to the bus station. She checked her suitcases and her hat box and took her to the Biltmore. So at that point, all she had was what she was wearing. That's it. She had borrowed a coat from Ann Toth. She was wearing a pair of shoes, and had her purse, and that's it. That's all she had. That all she had when she left the Biltmore was what she was carrying, and that is it. So, no, that's not likely. Let's see. Oh, well, glad you enjoyed it. Okay. Oh, and this is I guess I'll end on this. Patrick O'Reilly has to be considered a prime suspect. Again, this is an ask me, not a tell me. No, Patrick O'Reilly does not have to be considered a prime suspect. He like Carl Balsiger and George Hodel, was examined and eliminated. Nope. He didn't do it. And people will say, well, he was a shady character. Yeah, he was. That doesn't make him a killer. He changed his name. Yes, he did. That doesn't make him a killer. He did this, and I should point out as we're wrapping up here, you will see on Wikipedia that Patrick O'Reilly was an orthopedic surgeon. No, that's one of the problems with Wikipedia. Have you been reading the internet again? Don't do that. Patrick O'Reilly was an osteopath, okay? But a little bit different than an orthopedic surgeon. So no, he was looked at. There's a story about Patrick O'Reilly doing this amazing, surgery that saved the singer's life. Okay. What is the source for that story? Patrick O'Reilly. Okay. Okay. A woman would not voluntarily wear the same clothes for a week. It appears likely that she was being held against her will very soon after the last time she was seen. Do you agree? Not necessarily. We don't know. We don't know. We do know about her behavior is that she didn't like to wear other people's clothing. She didn't want anybody wearing her stuff. what we know from Ann Toth, that Elizabeth Short was extremely fastidious. She would wash out her stuff every night. We do know that about her. She was very well maintained. She was very she maintained herself. So, you know, did she go without a bath for a week? Well, no, that's not her style. She was the kind of person who would wash out her stuff at night. So, okay. And there we have it. It's been fun. It's been great. I will see you in if you come around for the George Hodel stuff, that's on the 18th. And then what did I say? December 2nd? The next one, December. I think that's right. December 2nd. Okay. And thank everybody for not dressing up like like the Black Dahlia for Halloween. Thank you. Okay. See you later. Say goodbye, Boxy.